Hello students. In the last lecture, we discussed how national interest as a concept predates the Treaty of Westphalia that was signed in the year 1648, its twin goals, and the objective and the subjective definitions of national interest, which highlights its dual character. In this lecture, we will discuss three broad approaches that link national interest to specific foreign policies and various theoretical perspectives on what national interests actually are. So, this would be the outline of our lecture. First, we'll focus on various approaches on national interest. Then, we will identify what are actually the national interests from different theoretical perspectives, and then we will end our discussion with some concluding remark. Let us talk about various approaches to understand national interest. Given these two attributes such as inclusivity and exclusivity, what criteria link the concept of national interest to specific policies, that is again a big question. Those who want to tackle this question, they do it through three approaches. The first is what is called elitist approach, the second is the realist approach, and the third is what you can call the democratic approach. According to the elitist approach, one may simply equate national interest with the policies of those who are officially responsible for the conduct of foreign policy. So, basically we understand and we accept that those who are in the responsible positions, those who are the prime minister, those who are the president, those if he or she is a foreign minister, so because they are in the top position, we are not bothered about national interest, because we believe, we assume, we consider that they are the best people who can look at our interest in a much more effective way. They are the best judges of various policy trade-offs, because they do it and they consider what is best for our country because of their appropriate expertise and authority to speak for the whole country. So, they are the trained people, they are the best people, they have the necessary expertise, they have also the authority because they are the president or prime minister or the foreign minister. So, we are not bothered about the issue, because we know because of their expertise, because of their high position, so they will do better for the country, they will think about the national interest of the country. The difficulty with this elitist approach is that it does not help much in distinguishing a good foreign policy from a bad one. So, if you consider that those who are in the responsible position, they have the necessary expertise and they have the necessary skills, then this does not help us to understand the problem between a good foreign policy and a bad foreign policy. Nehru took a lot of foreign policy decisions which were considered at that time as the best, and that served the interest of the country in the best possible way. But nowadays we consider that those policies are actually very harmful, or those policies were particularly harmful for the country. So, the problem is we can't, there is no guarantee that those who are sitting in the high positions, those who have the necessary expertise or skills, they would definitely do always better for the country, or they can't do anything wrong for the country, because that is the problem when you can't distinguish a good policy from a bad policy. But there is a argument that as long as the government pursues what it seems to be general societal objectives and do so for a long period of time, it can never act contrary to the principle of national interest. So, one solution is that if the people who are in the high positions of power, those who have necessary expertise and skills, if they focus on the general societal objectives that serves the interest of all sections of the society, and they do it for a long period of time, then definitely we can consider that it is not contrary to national interest. A second approach closely identified with the realist school of thought concepts of national interest in terms of some basic assumptions about the nature of international relations and the motivation of states. So, the realists are taking a different position on national interest. Basically, their focus is the nature of international relations. the kind of anarchy, the kind of self-help, the kind of security situation, and they also look at the motivation of the states. So you have to understand national interest in a much better way if you focus on the nature of international relations and the motivation of different nation states. These include the idea that anarchy makes security the paramount foreign policy concern of the state. So the realists, they understand national interest in a very different way than the elitist, and particularly they think that because anarchy and security, they are the paramount foreign policy concerns of the states. So we should focus on the nature of international relations and the motivation of the states. Security in turn requires the acquisition and rational management of power, which can never be divorced from the military force, and only policies conducted in this spirit can serve the national interest. So basically, if you focus on military aspect of power, if you focus on the acquisition and rational management of power or power distribution, so basically that will serve your interest, because the more priority is your survival, and for survival you need to focus on self-help, and that self-help will be helpful or will be possible if you focus on the acquisition and management of power. So that would better serve your national interest. Of course, this approach depends on the truth of the underlying assumptions. At the risk of oversimplifying a very complex debate, there are at least two problems associated with the realist approach to international relations. So if you try to understand national interest from the anarchy perspective, or the acquisition of power perspective, or from the security perspective, there are two problems, and that we have to discuss in order to have a better view of the realist perception of national interest. First, it often suffers from the problem of repetition, as interest is often defined in terms of power and power in terms of interest. So if you think of national interest from the anarchy perspective, from the security perspective, then there is a problem of repetition, because sometimes your interest will be defined in terms of power and power in terms of interest. So you are limited just to acquire power, to accumulate power, and that is your interest. So it's a very limited kind of understanding. It's a very restricted kind of understanding of national interest. It is not very helpful to say that nations must seek power because they seek power. So power for the sake of power. So that's not a kind of better understanding. So what is the purpose of acquiring power? You say it is security, it is anarchy. So that is not a very good understanding of national interest, because it's a very restricted view. There is an important tension between free will and determinism in the realist approach. So if there is international structure which is anarchical, and you have no better options rather to focus on self-help, security and survival, so it's a kind of deterministic approach, that you have no free choice, rather you are compelled to do that because of the anarchical nature of international structure. So that is again the second problem of the realist understanding of national interest. Because if international relations are indeed determined by struggle for power, it should not be necessary to press the leaders to abide by the national interest as defined by the realist. So if you think that international relations are exactly determined by the struggle for power, then you have no right to press your leaders to do something else. So they will do everything in the name of acquiring power, they will do everything in the name of manipulating power. So they will not think anything else, because that will divert their attention from the primary goal of the nation, that is survival, that is dealing with anarchy, that is dealing with your security. So it's a kind of problem for the decision makers, because they would basically be focused on the military aspect of security. They would not think anything else beyond military security, beyond the problem of security and survival. If it is necessary to do so, the alleged constraint of anarchy cannot be invoked as the basis for identifying the national interest. So if you think of anarchy, if you think of your security, if you think of your survival, so the politician, they will not do anything beyond that. So that is one problem. And if they do something else other than security, other than anarchy, other than self-help. So it means you are not focusing on those concerns. In a way they are diverting from the main issues which has been the decision makers, the leaders. They are not bound to follow anything else rather than the struggle for power. If it is necessary to do so, the alleged constraints of anarchy cannot be invoked as the basis for identifying the national interest. Realists put us in only two situations: either you think of anarchy, you think of security, you think of survival, and these issues are more important for the decision makers, and in that circumstances the decision makers have no choice other than this. If you consider this as the basis for your argument, then in a way you are restricting the decision makers to act on only on those issues. If you accept the realist argument, then there is a problem of free will versus determinism. If you stick to the deterministic position that international structure is characterized by anarchy and you need self-help, you need security, then you are restricting the decision makers to pursue something, to frame something or to formulate something other than security and survival. So the realists put us in a very different kind of situation. It's either you act on the basis of your free will or you act on the basis of determinism, that is the anarchical nature of the structure will force you to do what is required under the circumstances. So you have not much choice to decide about your national interest. So in that way if either you take the deterministic view or you think of the free will. So that is a problem with the realist theory of international relations. In complete contrast, a third approach to the national interest suggests that the rules for its identification are given by the tenets of political process that have an independent normative value, those of democratic procedure. So the third approach differs from both the elitist approach and the realist approach of international relations, and it basically emphasizes on the role of the democratic procedure to know what is your national interest and what your national interest is not. In other words, the national interest can best be identified when it resolves itself into a verifiable expression of your nation's preferences. So if you follow the democratic procedure, definitely you will have a better understanding of national interest, because you have to, what you have to do is you have to follow a verifiable expression of the nation's preferences, and the assumption that a nation's interest cannot be more accurately expressed by some external observer than by the standards of the nation itself. In this way undermines both the elitist and the realist views. So the point is, the decision makers, the politicians, those who are the professional diplomats, they know the best interest of the nation, because the outsiders they are not in a position to say what is good for you, what is bad for you. So this kind of democratic procedure, that they are democratically elected, they are the foreign minister, they are the legitimately elected prime minister. So this kind of democratic procedure adds a kind of legitimacy, and they are the people who have faced the electorate, who have been elected by the voters. So they know the pulses of the people, they know the interests of the people. So in that way democratic procedure actually helps us to understand the concept of national interest in a much logical and better way. In the absence of democratically aggregated and expressed judgments on the matter, the link between foreign policy and national interest cannot be known. So this view, they basically consider that when you talk of national interest, you have to understand the aggregated interest of all the sections of the society, all the groups in the society, and this kind of express judgment on the matter that helps you to understand the link between the foreign policy and national interest. So long as there is a democracy, there is a democratic procedure, they are democratically elected, they know the people's interest and expectations. So there is no problem, because the others, the outside actors, the others, they are not in a position to know what is required for your country, what is required for your people. Now, let us talk about various kinds of national interest. Within the field of international relations, national interest has frequently been assumed to comprise the pursuit of power, security and wealth. So, these are the three main values for which all nations are interested in, and they are interested for these three values when they deal with other countries or formulate the policies for other countries. Neo-realist and liberal institutionalists particularly tend to define national interest as revolving around security and power. So, we have already discussed about the realist approach to national interest. So, they are all interested for security and power because of the anarchical nature of international politics. Liberal scholars on the other hand consider national interest as the aggregation of the preferences of all the domestic groups and sections. So, there are so many different groups in the society. So, national interest can be understood as the aggregation of the interest of all the sections of the society, all the communities living within the country. So, that is their perception of national interest. The constructivist scholars on the other hand reject the whole concept of national interest given by the realists and the liberals, particularly because they consider national interest as something static and can be assumed a priori. Rather, the constructivists argue that the preferences of the states are all shaped through social interactions and are changeable. So, they particularly think that if you think of the realist theory that security, survival, accumulation of power, these are all constant. So, in a way you consider national interest as something permanent, something static, and it is not changeable. When you live in a continent like Europe, where there is European Union, so your concept of survival, your concept of security may not be as problematic as you are not living in a supranational organization. So, the whole concept of security and survival, they are shaped through social interactions and they are also changeable. Gunn argues that national interest has three components: security, prosperity and social well-being, and they all are part of framing the problem and solutions. So, if you look at these three values, security, prosperity and well-being, they combinedly together gives an idea of a country's national interest, give a complete view of a country's national interest. All three matter, and more than that, they reinforce each other. Three values reinforce each other. For instance, security underpins prosperity, prosperity creates power and pays for security, and a well functioning society reduces economic and security risks. So, these three are interrelated to each other, they are linked to each other because one leads to the other contributes for the third. So, that is how national interest can be understood according to Gurdon. So, basically the point is if you think of prosperity, so prosperity helps you to acquire more and more power, and it is also helpful for your security, because if you are economically rich, if you are prosperous, you do not bother about your security, and if there is a well functioning society, so that also helps for your economic development and reducing the security problem. So, in that way all the three values, all the three variables are important for understanding your national interest. Others, the main interest of states in international relations are security, sovereignty, welfare, image and justice. So, let us now start one by one. Security. Ensuring the security of the country is the most important national interest of a particular country. The notion of security is not very clear, but it can be understood as both military security and non-military security. So, your security can be best secured if you create armed forces, spend a particular part of your GDP for security and establish specific institutions, those who are responsible for your security. So, your security that consists of both military and non-military aspects, that can be better ensured if you have a standing army, if you spend a particular amount of your GDP for your security, and you also establish special institutions like National Security Council, Ministry of Defense, so these are all important for a country's security. Next is your autonomy or sovereignty. Sovereignty of a state implies the state's right to arrange its domestic and foreign policies independently. So, you have a kind of autonomy to decide about your domestic and foreign policy, and others have no right to interfere in those issues. So, that is basically the meaning of sovereignty or autonomy. In modern international relations, there is a limit to states' sovereignty. States undergo difficulties to retain sovereignty due to obligations to international organizations, international law, signed international treaties, need to harmonize their interest with the foreign policy and interest of other countries, or sometimes unilateral acts in military and economic spheres become unduly expensive. So, there are problems with sovereignty, and we can't think of sovereignty in the traditional way we understood that 50 years back. So, there are so many problems, there are so many limitations on your sovereignty. So, that is a factor that we cannot ignore. However, states may save their sovereignty by invoking such instruments of foreign policy as increasing of military and economic power. So, but there are limitations on state sovereignty, there is no dispute on that, but at the same time we cannot ignore the fact that sovereignty is still considered as an important value for the state, and it is an increasingly important component of a state survival and this security. So, welfare is another important interest for the states. There is another important interest of a particular country, and if you broadly interpret it, it basically means thinking of the welfare of your people or welfare of your citizens. The ground for welfare is property and economic efficiency. They can be increased in various ways. One of these is the international trade and commerce, the success of which depends on the capability of a state to make use of its comparative advantage. So, you can ensure security for your people, you can think of their welfare if you are economically prosperous, and one way of doing that is to engage yourself with a higher amount of international trade and commerce. In that way you will be securing the interest of your people, but again you have to focus on the comparative advantage in which you have the specialization, you have the expertise, because all countries are not competent in all the respects. So, you have to leverage your comparative advantage and act accordingly. Then the next important interest of a state is the image, or that can be equated with status and prestige. A state must be respected in the international arena. Image of a state depends on various components. The most important for them is the size, economic powers, cultural level, and input into the world culture, the development of science and technologies, the observance of democratic rules and stability of democracy, respect of human rights and sports. So, these are the ways through which you can get status and prestige in international relations that can improve your image. So, if your country size is bigger, if you have economic development, if your cultural level adds to the world's culture, if you are developed in science and technology, biotechnology, nanotechnology, space technology, artificial intelligence, big data. So, these are your technological achievement that also adds to your country's image. You just imagine when India landed in the moon, that created a kind of prestige for India, or it increased India's image as a country that can master the moon. So, the point is these are the factors that adds to the country's image, that adds to your country's status and prestige. Justice is another important interest that the states give priority. It can be understood differently by different states because of their differences in culture, but one thing is sure, that there are something which every states are interested in. Suppose interest they want to ensure the interest of their nationals residing abroad, or to rearrange the world so that that is beneficial to them, to their power position, and to attain civilizational status, as India is nowadays emphasizing to emerge as a Vishwaguru. So because that will add justice to its civilizational status. So India is not just a nation state, rather it is a civilizational nation state, and in that way the concept of Vishwaguru is based on reviving the past glory and to make India important contributions to international politics. So that means justice is also given priority by all the countries, and it is considered as an important part of their national interest. Let us summarize what we have discussed so far. There are three main approaches that connect particular foreign policy with the national interest. They are the elitist approach, the realist approach, and the democratic approach. The elitist approach emphasizes the role of a select group of elites, such as political leaders, policymakers, and influential decision makers, in determining and pursuing the national interest of a country. However, the critics argue that it can lead to elitism, exclusion of diverse perspectives, and potential detachment from broader social concerns. The realist approach posits that states are primarily motivated by self preservation, power maximization, and security in an anarchic international system. Hence, national interest is seen as the pursuit of military strength, strategic alliances, and territorial integrity to ensure the state's survival and domination of a nation state. The democratic approach to national interest emphasizes the role of democratic processes, public participation, and transparency in defining and pursuing a country's interest in international relations. It posits that national interest should be determined through inclusive debates, elections, and consultations involving elected representatives and informed citizenry. This approach values legitimacy, accountability, and responsiveness to public opinion in shaping the foreign policy decisions, aiming to align state actions with the preferences and values of the population while promoting democratic norms in international affairs. We also discussed the realist, liberal, and the constructivist perspectives about what national interests actually consist of. From a realist perspective, national interest consists of ensuring state survival, maximizing power relative to other states, and securing strategic advantages in an anarchical international system. The realists emphasize the importance of military capabilities, territorial integrity, and alliances as essential components of national interest. They view international relations as fundamentally driven by competition for power and influence, where states prioritize their own security and survival above all other considerations. So these are bare, security needs of a state which cannot be compromised at any cost. And if you compromise these, bare minimum security issues, then you will no longer remain as a state in international relations. From a liberal perspective, national interest consists of promoting values such as democracy, human rights, free trade, and international cooperation. Liberals believe that fostering stable and prosperous international relations through diplomacy, economic interdependence, and multilateralism serves the long term interest of the nation states. They emphasize the benefits of collaboration with institutions like the United Nations and the spread of democratic governance as crucial elements in advancing peace, prosperity, and stability globally. Constructivists argue that national interest is shaped by evolving ideas, values, and perceptions of national identity rather than any fixed material interest. They emphasize the importance of discourse, historical context, and collective beliefs in determining how states perceive their interests and engage with other actors on the global stage. In the next lecture, we will continue to discuss about national interest, but especially focus on the methods and instruments of national interest and examine its relationship with foreign policy and ideology. Thank you for your patience. Goodbye. See you in the next lecture.